Hello, I am Deacon Diana Coho with Arlington Metaphysical Chapel, and I thank you for joining us for today's message. Our scripture reading today comes from Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 12 through 14, New International Version. They will be like a well-watered garden, and they will sorrow no more. Then young women will dance and be glad, young men and old as well. I will turn their mourning into gladness. I will give them comfort and joy instead of sorrow. I will satisfy the priests with abundance, and my people will be filled with bounty. This ends the scripture reading. Today's sermon was inspired by our current situation, starting with the COVID pandemic, our unprecedented rate of connectivity through the internet, and the accelerated rate of change throughout the world. As the pandemic drones on, people are at odds over the need to social distance and protect the common good with the need to work and meet their daily needs. The news, the internet, social media provide information about the effects this pandemic is having on a global scale. Most of us are affected by major disruptions in daily living amongst our families, neighbors, and friends. Hospital patients and nursing home residents cannot receive visitors. Schools, businesses, community centers, and places of worship are closed. Daily food, cleaning supplies, and medicine can be difficult to find or afford. As more people tune in to what is going on around them and try to make the best possible choices, other unfolding events are now at the forefront of the public eye. Economic struggles, rioting and protests over discrimination and social injustice, calls for real change from groups like Black Lives Matter. Controversial Supreme Court decisions are coming fast and furiously. Outcries to right age-old wrongs are being heeded through corporate actions and boycotts, change laws, and new policies. During such tumultuous times, our belief systems are challenged. We all experience shifts and changes on many levels. Like the prophet Jeremiah, who went through so much, we may need reminders that all will be well. All is in divine order. As we experience so much upheaval, we can look to the context of the scripture, history, and natural law for insight and support. Each year, the Jewish religion observes a 21-day period of national mourning known as Tisha B'Av, which coincides with late July in the Gregorian calendar. Several horrific events occurred during this period, such as the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem by the Babylonians and forced exile and displacement of the Jewish people from their Holy Land. Many other atrocities occurred during this 3-week period, known as the time between the straits. In accordance with the verse, all her oppressors have overtaken her within the straits, or within the narrow places, from Lamentations chapter 1, verse 3 of the Jewish Bible or Tanakh, New JPS translation. The Lamentations of Jeremiah also mourn the loss of the second temple, which was burned to the ground by the Romans. We see that over time, as we build our sacred temple, that channel between heaven and earth, inwardly and outwardly, it can be shaken to the core or burned to the ground based on events or challenges in our consciousness. Then we begin a new cycle and rebuild based on all we have learned once we have mourned the loss of it all that it represented, and all that it meant for us. Tisha B'Av includes a period of fasting and then a feast, which represents the end of mourning and a new phase of abundance and plenty, sustenance to nourish our bodies, minds, hearts, and souls. Many people, including the Native Americans here in the United States, were also forced to flee their homelands, losing them, their sacred sites, and the equivalent of what those from Judeo-Christian backgrounds would call the first temple of Jerusalem. Tribal people were forced to march hundreds of miles to reservations which did not include their sacred lands, burial grounds, stones, trees, wildlife, or traditional plants used for medicine and ceremonies. Boarding schools were forced upon the tribes under the brutal implementation of their hard-won treaty rights for education, housing, and health care in exchange for their sacred lands. Young children were taken from their parents, forbidden to speak their language, practice their religion, or other customs to break their connection with spirit, where they drew their strength and identity under the harsh assimilation policies. Yet our tribal nations persevere and rebuild despite hardship and broken promises. Today, some of the Indian boarding schools support cultural and language preservation, serve traditional foods, and host ceremonial dances and powwows, living their way through destruction, sorrow, and mourning to a new phase of joy. Metaphysically speaking, destruction of the temples through fire represents transmutation, then rising from the ashes like the great phoenix or thunderbird. Many of today's rapidly unfolding changes have been a long time in the making. Most of the issues being raised are not new, having been oft repeated throughout history, yet the scales have reached a new tipping point. Why now? This is possible because of where we are individually, nationally, and globally in our state of higher consciousness. Some people may think this is sudden or unexpected, but we know that divine law is always in effect. We tend to think of karma, cause and effect, which we can see and will consider in more depth. The laws of acceleration, connectivity, and evolution are definitely apparent. The law of cycles, too, and the knowledge that this too shall pass, as well as the law of abundance, to name a few. One way to express the multiple levels of evolution and change occurring at this time reminds me of my high school science classes and the concept of Brownian motion, named after Robert Brown, a Scottish botanist. Wikipedia tells us Brownian motion, or pedesis, from the ancient Greek meaning leaping, is the random motion of particles suspended in a fluid, a liquid or a gas, resulting from their collision with the fast-moving molecules in the fluid. This pattern of motion typically consists of random fluctuations in a particle's position inside a fluid subdomain, followed by relocation to another subdomain. Brown studied this using grains of pollen, then chips of granite, even fluid-filled vesicles of rock from the Great Sphinx, to show that it was a non-living phenomenon. Encyclopedia Britannica tells us that by the 1860s, theoretical physicists had become interested in Brownian motion and were searching for a consistent explanation of its various characteristics. A given particle appeared equally likely to move in any direction. B, further motion seemed totally unrelated to past motion. And C, the motion never stopped. In 1905, almost 80 years later, Einstein modeled the motion of the pollen as being moved by individual water molecules. This explanation of Brownian motion showed that the atoms and molecules exist, though they are too small to see under the microscope at that time. His work also helped explain other forces acting on the molecules which could not be seen, thus making the movements less random and more predictable. The French physicist Jean-Baptiste Perrin verified Einstein's analysis, for which he won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1926. He proved that the direction of the force of atomic bombardment is constantly changing, and at different times the particle is hit more on one side than the other, leading to the seemingly random nature of the motion. The Encyclopedia Britannica goes on to say that if a number of particles subject to Brownian motion are present in a given medium, and there is no preferred direction for the random oscillations, then over a period of time, the particles will tend to spread evenly throughout the medium. This process, where a substance spreads from regions of high concentrations to lower concentrations, is called diffusion, derived from the Latin meaning to spread out. This suggests an orderly progression towards a new, calmer state, an even redistribution of sorts, something many of us are longing for after so much disruption and change. Diffusion processes studied in terms of Brownian motion include the diffusion of pollutants through the atmosphere and the diffusion of calcium through bone tissue in living organisms, among countless others. Thus, we see how important these laws of motion are to us in our daily lives at the most basic cellular levels within us, as well as in the building of structures and movement of forces in the larger macrocosm of the planet Earth and beyond. We can draw parallels about Brownian motion to current events when we consider how we are all suspended in the same reality here on Earth and may quickly end up in a different place, physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually, than when we rang in the new year in January 2020. At that time, COVID-19 was barely a blip on the horizon. It seemed so far away and insignificant to us here in the United States. Before long, we felt bombarded by so many new challenges. We could see new changes coming all the time, perpetual motion as events rapidly unfolded, though we could not seem to tell which way things were heading. As metaphysicians, we make conscious choices which affect our vibrations down to the cellular level, which in turn affects what and whom we attract in our lives. Einstein's work helped reveal unseen forces and other factors, including the size of the molecules and the viscosity of the fluid the molecules are suspended in, which affect Brownian motion. If we equate our individual existence to one of those molecules, then the smaller the molecule, the easier it is to move. To the extent that we let go of our attachments, reduce our baggage, eliminate feelings and thoughts from our lives that no longer serve us, the lighter we become. If we equate our immediate environment with viscosity and do what we can to seek and find lighter substrates, less toxic surroundings, be they physical, intellectual, spiritual, or emotional, the freer we can become. This in large part affects motion, evolution, growth, and change on our individual level, as well as those around us, or the collective consciousness. We also know that karma exists on the individual level and at the group level to include community, family, friends, nation, planet, and finally, universal consciousness. The level of change and the choices we make, as always, begins within ourselves. What is the state of our inner temple? Are we staying attuned to God consciousness through our daily practices of meditation? Are we keeping our channel to the divine open? Are we willing to be of service? Grateful for the good, abundance, and divine energy constantly coming our way? Do we thank our spirit guides and teachers for leading us to the abundance we continue to experience despite the challenges? Each and every one of us is going through an internal reorganization on some level. Are we taking note and taking stock? On a group level, we may be helping coworkers, friends, and neighbors. Some of us may be on the front lines of the pandemic, working in healthcare or feeding the needy. Others may serve in law enforcement to ensure our right to peaceful protest while protecting public safety. Groups pop up on Facebook to help people find and share supplies like masks, hand sanitizer, diapers, and baby food. With adoption of more telework, we see reports of environmental improvement. I'm pleased to keep the progress going on this front, which can only be understood in today's terms by keeping our carbon emissions down. Opportunities for service have skyrocketed, and the need to keep our own houses in order is imperative. As the bastions of many outdated and outmoded ways of believing, thinking, and acting are crumbling, many people need healing and support. Those who have lost loved ones, jobs, homes, or are in the process of revising long-standing beliefs. While we may not agree with them, some of us are really struggling to comprehend what appear to be random forces pervading their lives, a newly emerging world order, and our individual and communal roles in it. Some people feel that their temples have been destroyed, that they have been exiled and abandoned. Can we approach them with mindfulness and compassion? Can we remain open and willing to work out our differences peacefully? We may be mourning losses, yet we can take the time to consciously decide what we want to release or transmute, and which beliefs we want to keep within our own inner sanctuary. These decisions will affect our vibration and what we attract and build upon moving forward. The recent changes have been swift, pervasive, unsettling, but the new order is coming, and we can feel it deep in our bones. The influx of new research, data, trends, and patterns in the pandemic is slowly starting to make more sense. We are more in tune with the evolution of universal consciousness, how our individual actions affect the whole. New solutions are taking root. New temples are being built upon higher ideals for social justice and equality for all. Indeed, this evolutionary transmutation is still underway, and we are not through it yet. Many stressors remain and could affect things for quite a while before diffusion fully takes place and a new order becomes clear. As co-creators, we can and do play a role in this. We can take time to contemplate this and be proactive, random as things may seem. We are not yet through the other side, but do we see rays of light shining through? Yes, indeed. Morning, Mourninge, has broken. When we realize this, our mourning wanes and a new awareness of abundance and joy takes root. We know that we can come out of this stronger than when this began less than a year ago. We shall sing and dance and be glad, celebrating the abundance of divine source, the sacred gifts of divine truth and divine law. Peace, love, and blessings to you and to all, today and every day.